We have permission from Dr. Addleton to record this session. We will put it up on our website. I'm sorry I didn't start the recording earlier, so we were unable to capture Ambassador Ahmed's remarks, but that's really it. We were talking earlier about how the motto of Forman Christian College has been a mainstay core value of most of Formanites that I meet, including yourself. You've quoted it many times: by love, serve one another.
Yes.
Wonderful.
I wanted to quickly thank you, Ambassador Akbar Ahmed. It's hard to even know where to begin, because I feel like I know you, even though we haven't met face to face. And I say that because I don't know when I first came across one of your first books on the frontier, but of course my library includes a number of your books over the years, including actually that translation of Pashto Proverbs, which you probably consider one of your minor contributions, but it's a wonderful collection, and I put it there as well. But anyway, it's a great honor that you're here, and I do look forward, actually, it probably is not possible on this trip, but on a future trip, let's definitely keep in touch and would welcome the opportunity to connect.
Yes, and Dr. Jonathan, for your information, that book on Mataluna, published by Oxford University Press, has been republished last year. So it's once again revived. You know, it almost disappeared for several decades, but I persisted and they have published it. And I've got a new book out, which I want to present to you, which is a good address for you. Can I get an address from Bonnie so I could post it to you, my new book?
I'll pass it on. And again, it's such a huge honor, and look forward to reading it for sure.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the PhD that Forman Christian College gave me when I last came to Pakistan about 4 or 5 years ago. Very big honor for me.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Well, we have only 50 minutes because this time is carved out of a busy schedule that was set months ago for the first week in October. Here we are. And with the people that we have on the call, I think the background material that I wanted to present may be overkill. So I will just briefly welcome everyone, reminding us that we have an hour. So it's a conversation with Dr. Jonathan Addleton, current rector of Forman Christian College in Lahore. We hope to post this event on our website and to have an opportunity to review. So the event is organized by the Asia Endowment Committee at Bradley Hills Presbyterian Church. We're in Bethesda, Maryland. We're delighted that the Asia Committee members today met with Dr. Addleton. That committee is small. We hope to grow the committee. So if you're listening and interested to participate, please let one of the committee members know. Norma Parker and I chair, tossing the terms chair and vice chair back and forth to each other. Kathy Lutters is secretary. Other members are Cindy Gear, Steve Fox, B. Fox. And we wouldn't be able to function without our constant consultant, Gina Kim Perry. So as I said, we are looking to grow. We're very honored to have our pastor, David Gray, our current associate pastor, Eunice Yang, and also our parish associate, Young. We have former members who retired from NIH to teach a range of science courses and seminars at Forman for 3 consecutive years, Leslie and George Johnson, who now live in Portland, Oregon. We have Forman alumnus Formanite, Ambassador Akbar Ahmed. We expect former Minister Mawahid Shah to join us, who had RSVP'd. So he had played a role in returning FCC to the administrative custodianship of the Presbyterian Church USA in 2004. So indulge me. I love to tell the origin story of Bradley Hills' partnership with FC College through creating this endowment. It was truly a collaborative, homegrown effort. Following the tsunami of 2004, when members turned to one another and said, "Do we as a congregation have any presence, outreach, or partnership in Asia?" We had connections with Africa, Latin America. We had many Asian former diplomats and AID people, but we didn't have a structured relationship in Asia. But Asia was so vast. What can a congregation in the US do that will make a difference? So we sat down to broaden our outreach and had a dinner meeting at a member's home, the Tustians, and the mother of one of the members of Bradley Hills, her name was Krishna Roy, had been sitting next to and visiting with Ruth Forman, who was married to Doug Forman, a Foreign Service officer. And Krishna Roy said at the end of the evening, well, you know, the administration of Forman Christian College, which was nationalized in 1972, has been returned this year to the PCUSA. And the forefather of your own member sitting right here was the founder. You could probably look into a relationship there. Now, that looked like a very large challenge, but one of our members, Cindy Gear, reminded us of mustard seed ministries. If you have faith as the grain of a mustard seed, you could say to this mountain, remove hence to yonder place, and it shall remove, and nothing shall be impossible for you. So Matthew 13 does tell us the story of the man who sowed mustard seed in his field, and it became greater than herbs, a tree, and the birds of the air came to lodge in its branches. So with the inspiration of our member who was born in Korea and watched Ewha Women's University grow from a tiny beginning to the major influential university in the country, she inspired us with this notion, and we began this effort and this outreach. We've been assisted by Akbar Ahmed, by Carol Yost from the Asia Foundation, by Nancy Powell, who spoke at our last event, with many of our members who have connections in Asia, and our Asia focus has grown to be a major interest in this congregation. So I have informed all of you in the invitation to Zoom the background of Dr. Addleton, who has now completed his first year as rector at FC College. He was actually born in Pakistan. He speaks fluent Urdu and is a revered American diplomat, having served in Asia with the USAID as an ambassador. And his background is fairly publicly known. He is former ambassador to Mongolia. So he and his wife are currently visiting in the DC area, and we are delighted to have you with us, Dr. Addleton. We are looking forward to hearing about your thoughts on the vision of Forman going forward, on the lessons that we can take from what has occurred in your neighboring Afghanistan in terms of looking and assessing the impact of women's education, and what we might focus on in our planning and partnership in support of the college. So we welcome you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I guess I do want to start with a shout out to Bradley Hills for that scholarship that continues, and it's 12 students a year, female students from all communities. And scholarships is actually one of the most important things we do, because it provides the diversity that we have on campus. And I'll get into that later on in terms of my talk. Also, a quick shout out as well to the Johnsons. I guess George and Leslie, when I said I was coming in, that Bradley Hills was on the program, some people at Forman said, "Oh, you got to, well, the Johnsons be there." And I guess they've moved out to the West Coast, but they're still here today. So, still fondly remembered and still very much appreciative of your contributions.
Yes, and please give our regards to everyone.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, very, very fondly remembered. And I did do a shout out at the beginning, but I'll say it again, Dr. Ambassador, Professor Akbar Ahmed, it's such an honor to have you here as well. So thank you very much for that. I will probably speak for about a half an hour, and there'll still be another half hour. We can go a bit beyond 6 o'clock. But basically, I like to talk about Forman anytime, anywhere, to anybody. But this is a particularly special audience. I say that because actually another thing that's on the reason for being here is not only the Friends of Forman board meeting, but also the accreditation process with the New England Commission on Higher Education. We're going through that. And so that's provided an opportunity to present Forman in different kinds of ways. And it's, one of the things that when people have asked me about what I wanted to accomplish while I was in Forman, and the story, I would say the miraculous story about the denationalization and the things that flowed with that. And of course, Dr. Peter Armacost was heavily involved in that. And then his successor was Dr. Jim Tebby, who I knew well. His sister was in my class growing up in Pakistan. And everyone's made a contribution. One of the things I do hope to have is strengthen still further the international aspects of our university. And I think things like NETCHI, that accreditation with New England, would be one aspect of that. And a second one is actually the quality. of our institution, will continue to grow. But I think that at this point, we want to make sure that we have the depth as well as the breadth. And so that's one thing to focus on. But in terms of the talk, I would say a short introduction to myself, because I think that some of that's been provided. But I did want to say that I feel fortunate to have been born in Pakistan, to have been born in the Himalayas. And I talk sometimes about the chapters of my life in Pakistan. One, of course, is the one that my parents gave me, which was the first 18 years of my life, to have been born and raised there. And in fact, even at that time, I took a visit to the Forman campus, which I still remember, actually. It was because the MCS, Murray Christian School Choir, went down to sing at the chapel. And I got along at the last moment. I was accepted at the last moment to be able to go on that trip. And of course, when you're in 9th or 10th grade, you look forward to these trips. And I was the number 2 page turner. And to make a long story short, the number 1 page turner broke his leg in a soccer game. And so I got to go to Forman, and that was my first recollection of singing in the chapel there. And of course, that chapel's still there for those of you that have visited. But, you could say that was my parents that introduced me to Pakistan and spent those first 18 years later. But I kept on coming back. So the first chapter was a 6 months overseas, sponsored by Northwestern University. And of course, I chose to come back to Pakistan. And I wrote a paper on Pakistan's relations with the Middle East, which is Professor Akbar Ahmed knows is actually an important aspect of the history of Pakistan, is sort of turning in some sense toward the Middle East at certain points in time. And I came back again for an Urdu language program. This was only 10 weeks, but it was an excuse and a plane ticket to come back to Lahore. And I actually come back to Pakistan, but it happened to be in Lahore. So that gave me a much better picture of the old historic city of Lahore. I came back a third time for my dissertation research in Pakistan. That was, by this time I was at Tufts University. I was doing it on the building on my earlier work on the immigration from Pakistan to the Middle East, which again has had a big impact over the years in all kinds of ways. I did join the Foreign Service, and everybody was totally surprised because the bureaucracy sent me as my first assignment to Pakistan. Everybody says the bureaucracy doesn't work like that. I was supposed to be sent to Bolivia or something, but they sent me back to Pakistan. And that was a memorable 4 years. It was the start of my career. And of course, I met my wife there. She was Fiona. Some of you have met her. She was teaching at the British School, and it's been a wonderful partnership. We've had 3 kids that we've raised internationally. And, so I had my first assignment. And the part that surprises people is in the 90s, when we were in my Foreign Service career, we lived in Yemen, we lived in South Africa, we lived in Kazakhstan, and we kept on coming back to Pakistan. So I'd go to the embassy office for our annual vacation, and I would inquire about the tickets to Pakistan. And people were surprised, but of course we were heading to the northern areas. We wanted to see those wonderful mountains, which if you come to Pakistan, you'll just, they're just fantastic. Again, kept on coming back. And then of course, 9/11 and things changed in many, many ways. I wasn't sure I'd be coming back to Pakistan, but you had the earthquake in Pakistan in 2005. And I came afterwards as USAID mission director and was heavily involved in the earthquake reconstruction work, the partnership with Pakistan, with many other countries as well. General Nadeem at the time was the head of the Earthquake Relief and Reconstruction Agency. And it was a difficult time, of course, because of the earthquake, but in terms of one's work in a humanitarian area, it was an event that brought the country together. And people have short memories, but 60,000 people were killed, 3 million people made homeless, had a huge impact in a relationship that's been up and down, for all kinds of reasons. It was actually a good issue to mobilize around, again, humanitarian assistance. And so that brought me back. And what I remember was in the summer of 2007, saying my farewell to the USAID mission in Islamabad. And most of those people were from Pakistan, and basically saying, I've had these chapters of my life in Pakistan, and I'm not sure I don't have one more chapter to spend in Pakistan. And I was sort of saying that somewhat facetiously, but it was in some sense trying to give a sense for how this was a country that has shaped me in many ways, and I wanted to continue to contribute to. But unbeknownst to me, that next chapter does turn out to be Forman Christian College. And so it was a real honor after 3 years of retirement, 3 years of teaching at my hometown university, a couple of years of being head of the American Center for Mongolian Studies, to have this unexpected opportunity, this unexpected privilege to come back. And some of you have visited, it's an amazing institution in many ways, but the rest of my talk will we'll talk a little bit about some of that institution. Some of it will be familiar territory, some perhaps less so. I think that Bonnie mentioned at the beginning, the founding story. I think for any institution, the founding story is important, but the founding story for Forman is this guy, born in Kentucky, studied at Princeton, has this, call to come out to the subcontinent. He meets a Scottish missionary in Calcutta, basically tells him that education is what it's all about. And his first school is under a tree outside the old city of Lahore. And he has a group of students, Sikh students, Hindu students, Muslim students paying a paisa a day. And that's the origins of that, of Forman College and eventually, Forman University. That person, Charles W. Forman, was born, we celebrated his 200th birthday anniversary. He's buried outside Lahore. His funeral was a testament to the love that I guess he acquired over those years, because it involved all the faiths of the city. And it was said at the time that Charles Forman loved loved even the very dust of Lahore, was the expression. And so he's buried there. We had the 200th anniversary event where we went out to the grave, and afterwards we actually had a workshop, and interestingly enough, a seminar, if you will, symposium on the life of Charles W. Forman. And my part was the descendants of Charles W. Forman. So we did talk about Doug Forman, who was a member of Bradley Hills, and his Foreign Service career, which was interesting to me because I was in the Foreign Service. And we also talked about Charles Forman, I think the third, who was a professor at Yale University, where Charles Forman's papers are kept, and in many other ways. Some of Charles Forman's descendants were principals at colleges. Some of them were in different kinds of service work. But it is a remarkable story, and I think it, again, that legacy. I think it's the important thing about that legacy continues. So it was interesting to connect with that in the 200th anniversary. I might say this is maybe getting a bit too much technically for some people, but I think some people appreciate this, is that another 19th century educationist in the subcontinent was Sir Syed Ahmed Khan. Sir Syed Ahmed Khan was born 4 years before Charles Forman, passed away 4 years afterwards. Each of them founded a university, arguably the most important minority-led institution for Aligarh, Muslim-led institution in India, where Muslims are, of course, a minority, and for Forman, of course, what later after his death became Forman College, and again, a minority-led institution that contributes in very impressive ways to the lives of, or to the fabric of both countries, and is actually woven into the fabric of the countries. But I've connected with the Aligarh alumni group in Atlanta, Georgia, where I'm from. And I actually wrote a recently article about this, comparing Sir Syed Ahmed Khan as a 19th century educationist with Charles Forman. And if you look at their pictures, they look alike, with big flowing beards. Yeah. I think they were larger than life characters. But anyway, so Forman has this founding story. Of course, it has different phases in its history. One of the things that's important about Forman, and again, the focus of the scholarship program at Bradley Hills is on women. Remarkably, Forman, I think, was the first university in Punjab to admit women and offer degrees to women. That was in the early 1900s. They had other highlights. One of the ones I think I mentioned earlier was, many years ago now, but one of the professors, in fact, his sister was married to the then principal of Forman. He won the Nobel Prize for physics, which is quite remarkable when you think about that. And universities will always claim that kind of connection, and we can as well. You fast forward to different periods during 1947, during the establishment of Pakistan. Well, first the head of the Supreme Court that swore the new Governor General Jinnah, Qadi Azam Jinnah, into place was a Forman alumni, which is remarkable. But also, in keeping with its by love serve one another, one of the dorms became a field hospital for some of the casualties that were accompanied the independence of Pakistan. And the outgrowth of that was actually United Christian Hospital, which still exists in Lahore. I think in the post-independence phase, because the students had come from everywhere in both India and Pakistan, you had this remarkable legacy of alumni. Two presidents of Pakistan, 2 prime ministers of India, countless journalists, governors, politicians, senior civil servants, diplomats. And one of the things I've been taking to is reading some of the memoirs. Everybody from Kuldip Nair, who was a journalist, a very prominent journalist, I think was actually High Commissioner, if I'm not mistaken, for India to London. His memories of Forman. Then you read somebody like Jamshed Marker, a remarkable diplomat for Pakistan from the Parsi community, and then you read Abdul Sattar, whose children have established a scholarship at Forman in memory of their father and mother. Again, a former foreign minister, read his memoirs, and others as well. And what they remember about Forman is this space of meeting people from many different traditions, religious traditions, but also geographic areas, ethnic traditions, and even the socioeconomic aspect, which we have which is part of this diversity. And so again, I think this thread of that is part of our history for so long, and it's certainly something that we're very proud of. And I think those of you that notice those of you that visit will notice that we did a recent survey. We always survey students and faculty, and I think too that aspect of that, sometimes it's called harmony is the word that they use for it. People may come from whatever community, and maybe there's someone from the northern areas that they've never met anybody from the northern areas before. Or maybe there's a Christian professor, a Christian student, and maybe they've had a Christian as a domestic help in their house, but they've never met in a sort of collegial, professional kind of way. And that also includes the different communities within Islam, different communities within Christianity. I was taking a walk on one of my first days in Forman, and I come across a guy, and I enjoy talking, and lets me practice my Urdu, and this guy, what's your name? Oh, it was Parcham Singh, I think was the name. And anyway, it turns out he's from Sucker, which you guys won't know where it is, but it's Upper Sindh. And he says, I was born in Shikarpur. And I said, oh, I lived in Shikarpur for 15 years. It turns out it's a Sikh. And the first officer in the Pakistan Army is a Sikh who got his degree at Forman College. And this is another example I'll say about that is the first, I inquired about some of the people where I came from, and it turned out that a couple of our college students come from, they said, oh, they're Kalashis. And again, Professor Akbar Ahmed will know that it's not necessarily that common to have a Kalashi student at your university, but that too is part of the tradition. So that's really a remarkable part of the story. What I'll do for the second part, and go quickly, I've covered some of these as the distinctives. This was partly for our accreditation. I gave the opening remarks, and I said there's things that we're especially proud of. One of them was the alumni list that I've referred to. A second is the campus, and I'll just say very briefly, because those of you that visit know it's a garden spot in the midst of Lahore. It's sort of a place, we have a botanical garden as well. So the buildings are beautiful. Sinclair Hall is one of our iconic buildings, was actually designed by the same person that designed the Minari Pakistan, which is one of the iconic landmarks of Pakistan. Just actually in the last couple of days, I got an email saying, can we take pictures? We're doing a book on, this is an architect in Lahore. We're doing a book on the evolution of architecture in Punjab. And we want to feature some of the buildings on campus. And of course, I was happy to say that I'm looking forward to the book with those pictures. And some of the early years, this is the campus was acquired in the early 1900s, that some of the buildings have those features, those environmental features like high ceilings and verandas that are really quite, quite in keeping with the environment. And of course, some of the later ones that you'll visit, the Armacost building and other buildings, they're beautiful buildings. And so this campus is something, a source of pride, and our students also, talk about it. In my list of things that I think are really wonderful about Forman, I included the faculty, staff, and students. I may send the link separately, but for the accreditation, we had a virtual tour. This was a virtual visit. And rather than me as a talking head or even our deans or whatever get on the screen, the virtual tour was conducted by our students. And anybody that sees that, there's a 3-minute version that I might circulate, and then there's a 15-minute version. Maybe I'll circulate that also. And many of them female students, by the way. Almost half our undergraduates are female, as are 2/3 of our graduate students. And so again, thinking about the focus that you put on female education, I think we're one of the contributors to that in Pakistan. But they give a great tour. And I taught in the classroom in the States, and I've said to people that these students at Forman, they would be wonderful presence in that classroom, in those classes that I taught on international relations, international development, and indeed would be outstanding students. I also included in my list of things that we're proud of at Forman the motto, "By love serve one another." And I told the story that before I came, I did a bit of web surfing about mottos from around the world, and the ones in Latin and the ones that talk about education and light and service. Service is there as well. But I came to the conclusion after looking through dozens of university mottos that I would be hard pressed to find one as wonderful as Forman. Just think about that. By love serve one another.
Yeah.
And when I came to the campus, I started to ask people. I said, "Is this something that's sort of just a slogan on a wall or something, or on an emblem?" And they assured me that people believe and that they take this to heart. And I've heard it quoted many times. And again, I think it's such a wonderful, wonderful slogan. The other thing I talked about, that things that may surprise you about Forman. Again, this is, I think, for you all is interesting as well. But for the accreditation team, we have about 8,500 students at the college and the university. What people in the U.S. don't necessarily always understand is that college in the Pakistan context is maybe equivalent of 11th and 12th grade. And so about 3,000 students, and this is it's a boys' college, and they're in the college. But when we talk about the university, we're talking about, when you say Forman Christian College, a chartered university, that was the charter that was given to us by the government of Pakistan. And that's the 5,500 plus students that form our university. And again, undergraduates, significant part of it, almost half of them women, and on graduate school, nearly 2/3 of them are women. The last two things I'm going to cover before moving on is what it means to be diverse and what it means to be a Christian university in Pakistan. And the diverse one, I think I've actually covered it pretty well. And it is one of the things that we're very proud of, that we have a campus that looks like Pakistan. I will acknowledge that we're in Punjab, and by far the largest share of our students come from Punjab, although that includes southern Punjab, which is perhaps less represented. But amongst all those students, we have a goodly number from the northern areas in particular. It's very intriguing, that little pipeline that people feel comfortable about sending their students there. From the tribal areas, it might surprise you the number of students we have from what I used to think of as the NWFP, now Pakhtunkhwa, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, and from Baluchistan. I was happy to meet that Sikh from Sucker that's in Sindh, but I feel like we could probably do with a few more students from Sindh. But we have a cadre of students from Baluchistan also that feel comfortable on the campus, and of course our boarding facilities is one of the things that make that possible. And then the Christian part, it's important to say that the denationalization for the Christian community in Pakistan was huge. It's an institution that they look up to, that is important to that community. And on the one hand, you might say, well, small minority, 1.5, 1.7%. But in terms of numbers of people, that actually translates into 3 or 4 million people. Many of them actually in Lahore and Punjab in particular. The Hindu population is more in Sindh. But 3 or 4 million people is a lot of people. It's I call it a deep community with institutions and traditions. And I think of Mongolia, where I was ambassador. The whole country had a population of 3 or 4 million people. So 3 or 4 million is a critical mass of people. In the Pakistan context, I mentioned, I think that our majority community students benefit. And actually, there's been a couple of occasions where I might say Forman, and they say, well, it's Forman Christian College. They want me to say that, and they're proud of that. And I'm not sure the embassy always gets that. I'm thinking of the U.S. embassy, because they don't realize some of the nuances or aspects about the Christian community and what it means. But I think that one of the things I say is that, in the States, you might have interfaith conferences or seminars or workshops. At Forman, this is something that we live and breathe all the time, because we're there together and we're talking to each other, and sometimes I think in remarkable ways, which isn't to say that there aren't challenges, that maybe there's sometimes frictions, or maybe there's, other thoughts or comments or whatever, but this space where people can get together. And again, the notion of what it means to be a Christian university. I was talking at Mercer, or I picked up a book at Mercer on Christian universities, and again, what does it mean to be a Christian university in the United States? And they talked about Baylor, and they talked about Notre Dame, and they talked about some of the Concordia or Valparaiso or Lutheran colleges or whatever. And a lot of the things that they were talking about was like, if more than 50% of your student body are not, don't have some Christian heritage, are you really a Christian institution? And Forman turns that upside down. And I think, I don't know, again, Professor Rector, what he would say about this, but I think it's an explicitly Christian university, but it's in the lighthouse mode or the beacon mode or whatever, in terms of this real lived together community experience, which I think is one of the precious things that Forman has and which you all support. I guess the final couple of things I had in my earlier presentations to the accreditation team was, the COVID response. We may have some questions about that, but we weathered that storm. It's been a challenge, but it's a continuing challenge. I guess we're on this one. I credit our faculty and students and staff for the resiliency. There's the leadership change, which others I guess can comment on that, but there's been, we've had good leadership with Peter Armacost and then Dr. Tebby, and now I think each of us, myself, we each bring something different, but hopefully we're the right people for the time. I talked a bit about governance. I won't talk about that here so much. The last thing I'll just say, though, is in terms of the financial aspect, and after the Cold War, there's been a number of colleges and universities that have been founded in different parts of the world that bear the name American and are proud of the liberal arts education that they offer. But our model, and we're proud of that as well, but our model is rooted in Pakistan in terms of our salary structure, in terms of our sustainability, and really, again, there's some aid people that have shared my work with the State Department in aid. We have benefited from grants, for example, for our female hostel and Fulbrights. We always do really well on Fulbrights. This year we had 8 UGrads, which are basic undergraduates that are selected to spend a semester at an American college somewhere, and it's a really wonderful experience for them. We had no less than 8 of our undergraduates were selected for this program, which I think is about 5% of the students selected this particular round. And we don't represent 5% of the student population in Pakistan, so they're very proud of our UGrads as well, and so we have U.S. support. But the existence of this institution, and it's partly because of the private giving of American citizens, does not depend on the government. We use it, we think it makes it better, we appreciate it, we'll look for opportunities, but it's a sustainable institution because it does not depend on a very heavy expat assistance, expat presence. We have some expat professors that come out. Some of them, I'm looking at the George and Leslie now. I'm not sure all of the arrangements, but some people are recently retired that really see a mission to come out and a real impact that they can have, and a sort of realization that they can have an impact, whether it's 1, 2, or 3 years. And so some fit in that category. And then we also have some younger professors that are looking for experience, maybe want to even do some research on their own, but they're not getting an expat salary. They're getting the same salary that a professor at Forman would get. I mean, we do provide the housing. That's partly for security, and that's a nice benefit. But it gives us a international dimension. But again, our existence is not contingent on an annual support from the government or even. I mean, we're a Pakistan institution, and we are. I'm trying to think of an example. Would be our budget, just to say it, is $16 million a year, about the same size as Mercer University in Macon, Georgia. Mercer University's budget is about $250 million a year, but they don't have any former presidents and prime ministers on their alumni list like we do. So I'm saying that not to diminish Mercer's contribution, and I appreciated my 3 years there. But again, our business, our model, and you have to in higher education, you have to be attuned to your sustainability. It's a different one, and I think it's a very interesting one that I think has merit. There's still a lot of time, and I realize in my foreign service career, I was sometimes I'm thinking of Norma there. I sometimes was referred to as the fastest speaking Southerner because my family origins are in the American South, but I speak quickly, and I realize I've spoken quickly here, but I wanted to pack a lot in, and I kind of wanted to lay out a lot of things that might be of interest, and that might prompt some questions maybe about the future of Forman, maybe about events in Afghanistan, maybe about it even in Pakistan. But anyway, I'll finish the formal remarks there, and I'm always open to questions. As I tell people, one of the things about, and again, thinking of Ambassador Akbar Ahmed, is as ambassador, you're ready for any question, and it's okay. You may have a diplomatic answer, but any question is fine. So any questions you want to ask is certainly fine. And again, thank you, Bradley Hills, for your continuing partnership, which I really want to continue long into the future. It's a very meaningful partnership, but thank you also for this opportunity to, relatively early in my time at Forman, to be able to provide this perspective.
Sounds impressive.
Thank you.
Excellent.
So much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Addleton. That's a wonderful beginning, wonderful kickoff. We're grateful for all of that detail and the extent of your presence and your return to Pakistan is something that is not known just from reading your Wikipedia page. So that's good. So there had been a couple of questions sent earlier. One had to do with the issue of women's education, what lessons to be learned from the situation in Afghanistan, as the women's education seems to be in some kind of peril yet to be decided. And what lessons might be applied to specific planning for women's education in neighboring country of Pakistan, or just the general lessons. And the other question in advance was the long-term vision, new areas of development for FC College. Others of you who have questions while he's responding to those, please look at the icon down below that says reactions. It looks like a little button. If you click that, you can push a raised hand feature. It's in the lower right. There, exactly. Ambassador Ahmed has already employed it. If you raise your hand, then we'll know that there are questions in line, and we can get to those. If you sit quietly, we don't know that you have something that you consider to be urgent. So we have two participants with raised hands, George and Leslie, but the two questions that came in advance, I invite you to respond to broadly, and then we can go to the specifics of those in the audience.
Okay, very quickly on the sort of future of Forman, we're actually about to start the fourth year of our 5-year strategy, and so we'll begin to look at that. That strategy anticipates an increase in enrollment to around 10,000, which I think seems reasonable. At the same time, I think that the rapid post-nationalization growth in terms of numbers of students, I think I mentioned, I alluded to that what I hope to bring, especially during my early years, is the strengthened vision of our international connections, and also the strengthened view that even as we expand, and we'll have some expansion, but in some sense, right now, the focus should be on the depth rather than the breadth of the programs. And so I have this strong interest in the quality aspect. And indeed, this accreditation is part of that effort, because when you go through accreditation process, you have to look at all your systems and your classroom instruction and your measurements of how effective you are. So I think that that's part of it for the future. Afghanistan is a tough one, because I don't know how much people read of the Wikipedia, but people know I have a personal experience in Afghanistan, and that's something that stays with me, obviously. And when everything happened, one of the things I quoted actually was a Pashtun proverb, which I don't know by heart, and I don't have it right in front of me, but basically it wasn't a political proverb, it wasn't a political verse. It was simply that when the Afghan child is freed from the clutches of war, when the Afghan child is freed from the clutches of poverty, they had one of the third one, and then they said, and then it will be good. It's almost like a biblical kind of quote, and it will be good when that happens. And of course, Pakistan, or rather Afghanistan, arguably, you could even go back to 1973 and say that that's been certainly since 79, but I think even since 1973, it's been some high level, some low level of violence, but it's been very difficult. And I think Afghans are exhausted in many kinds of ways. One of the other things I guess I would emphasize in this is the story is never over. And we talked a bit about lunch about this, about the investments in female education. the impact of that doesn't end now. The story's not over, and we have to sort of wait and see, I guess, in some ways what happens in the time ahead. And female education. I mean, whatever happens doesn't take away from the importance of that. I mentioned again at lunch my friend Zeba, who's done research in Gilgit for many years, and one of the things that her research highlights is actually the importance of the mother, and even a mother that may not have formal education. Her impact on the family is huge. And I think, of course, in that sense, Pakistan, I guess the figures is about somewhat less than 50% of the females in Pakistan are literate. That compares with something more like 75% for the males of Pakistan being literate. I think the overall literacy rate is around 63%. That's compared to the region. That's one of Pakistan's challenges. Is not very good. Although I guess I will say, when I was writing those figures in Islamabad with a junior aide officer in the 1980s, it was something like 30% literacy. So I don't want to say there hasn't been any progress. That would be too discouraging. But I think a lot of people would say that Pakistan's investments in education, starting at the primary level, need to be increased. But I do think, I mean, I've talked about the percentage of our students that are female. I think perhaps the more remarkable thing is some of our departments headed by females that set a good example, a mentorship example. And actually, one of the questions for our accreditation they asked was, wow, we see a lot of assistant professors that are female. And the first reaction from our administration was a little concern that maybe they're dinging us because all of our females are assistant professors rather than full professors or something. Maybe we have an issue there. But they were using that in a congratulatory way, that we were on a path to increasing the female representation even at the university level. So that's encouraging. And I know that the Bradley Hill's interest is in female education. There's perhaps more could be said about it, but I think that I would go so far as to say that Forman's punching above its weight in female education. And I think of that graduate education in particular, that family has a big influence, and some of the decisions might be to go overseas. I'm not sure, but I think that there's a level of families sending their kids, even what we may think are no longer kids in their teens and early 20s, there's a comfort level about what Forman represents that would encourage them to go there. And again, that cadre of females on their path to MPhils, in some cases PhDs, I think is something that Forman's definitely contributing to.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dr. Akbar?
Bonnie, I just I wanted to comment as a reaction to Dr. Jonathan's presentation. I feel very heartened having heard him. I feel very encouraged. And I'm very grateful that in this time when Pakistan is getting a lot of bad press, very often out of misinformation or even sometimes out of malice, but there is a lot of distortion. There's a lot of negative media coverage of Pakistan, and Pakistanis generally feel quite helpless in terms of what should we be doing. So a college like Forman Christian College has done so much to project a positive image of Pakistan, which is pluralistic, which is inclusive. Dr. Jonathan talked about the various heads of state and VIPs produced from the college on both sides of the border, India and Pakistan, which can continue to act as a platform to bring people together. I also was fascinated to see this comparison between the two great founding fathers, Forman, Bishop. He was a bishop, wasn't he, Dr. Jonathan? Bishop Forman?
Actually, I don't believe Presbyterians have bishops. So he was, he's known as an educationist. He was also an ordained minister, I guess is what I would say.
I think, Dr. Jonathan, it's high time you elevated him to a bishop now. From just what he's
You're
done.
Introducing hierarchy in Presbyterianism that doesn't exist at this moment.
Well, I wanted to say this, that the other gentleman you mentioned, Sir Syed Ahmed Khan, we have a link, my family, we are related to him. So we are very proud of his achievement in terms of education, because for us, really, there's nothing higher or nothing more noble than in human endeavor than education. So once again, thank you, Dr. Jonathan, and please remember to keep your promise. Next time you're in Washington, please have lunch with me. We'll invite friends, including the ambassador, including some of your colleagues from these wonderful people who support you, and it'll be a pleasure to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that lovely summary. And you have this host of witnesses to this, this invitation. So we'll be sure to remind him if he forgets. Very good. George and Leslie, you're next, and then Steve and B have a hand up as well.
We certainly wish you well in your endeavors to strengthen and grow the university. You know, it's really an island of tolerance that we saw that you don't see much of in Pakistan. Not only for the Christians, but for the Muslim students who could go there and learn tolerance directly, which was quite an accomplishment, we thought. People ask us, what do you think about your experience? I always say any adjective you want to use applies at some level, the good and bad. So we had, you know, fond memories of our experience, and we think it was one of the really serious and most beneficial activities of our life. At least I certainly feel strongly about that. Question I have is, with the new government took over, say, 4 or 5 years ago, is there any change in relationship with Punjab and Islamabad with what the university can and should be doing?
You know, I haven't sensed a big change, to be honest. I mean, one of the interesting things about Pakistan, of course, is that both at the provincial and the central level, you have the higher education commissions. And in some ways, they can be quite directive. And of course, we get a lot of communications and we try our best to respond to them. On the other hand, and this has happened even in recent years, the trend is actually to look favorably across a broader kind of education, liberal arts education, if you will. And the messages from their HEC are sometimes pointing in that direction, that we need to be less narrow. And so sometimes, you know, Forman is held up as an example of the way that we do it. Sometimes we get into trouble because some of the norms of liberal arts education have a kind of flexibility that's not necessarily, you know, built into higher education. Maybe it's inheritance from some aspects of the UK as well. But I think, you know, again, given the nationalization experience, I think that's a question that people ask. I think it's at a different place, and what I've sensed is a positive view toward Forman, certainly, you know, among most members of the public, but also in the government. One of the heartening things is, I mean, it's about 20 years since the real serious effort at denationalization got underway, and many of the people involved in that were from the majority community, and they will proudly come up to me and say, at that time I was in such and such a position and I was supportive of it, or it's wonderful to see that the progress that Forman has made, and now that you've arrived, you know, please continue it. So I realize times can change, politics can change, but I you know, the sense that I have is a positive perspective on Forman. And you know, even with the governments, and I mean, there's a couple of other things you might want to say is, you know, there's a tradition of you know, student political organizations even on campus and things like that. But I think that's much more in the past. I think what we want to do at Forman is just have a space where multiple voices are heard, and that's my that's my main thing. So I won't fall into the, you know, being identified with a government. I guess that's when my diplomatic skills will come into play. But I want to be forward-looking on Pakistan. That's my message. That's my comment. And you know, respect the government in power, as I would always do. But at the same time, you know, realize that Forman is an institution that outlives, or you know, it's in for the long haul, and we want to be there for the long haul for the future.
George and Leslie, can you remind us the years that you were there?
Yes, 2010, the fall semester through the end of the fall semester 2013. We left in January of 2014.
I want to mention one other comment. You know, again, yeah, I heard it was in the early teens there, but in terms of Forman and maybe the kind of opportunities, unexpected opportunities that a rector would have, is that every year the Inter-Services Selection Board meets to launch the process of selecting the next generation of military officers. And at that time it was interesting because the the military, I mean, they express some concern over the next generation. They're, what's internet doing to the next generation? Are they committed to Pakistan? It's an appropriate question, and they're different from our generation. And how do we pick the right in this case military leaders for the future? And they, interestingly enough, they had a number of psychologists from University of Karachi and other places to sort of give their take on where the next generation is coming from. Maybe it's a question that we ask ourselves too sometimes of the next generation. But they asked one vice chancellor of Government College University to talk, and they invited me to talk. And that talk was about identity. They asked me to speak about identity, which I thought was kind of interesting. And of course, I have this history that includes, Pakistan is part of it, and my wife is from Scotland, and of course I have strong roots in the American South that are also very much a part of who I am. But again, I thought about, Forman, there's many vice chancellors they could choose from, but for them to, reach out and say, we want to hear your perspective, I thought was just amazing. But it also reminds me again at what a privilege I have, and again, this is the military, that they think that there could be some interesting, useful, and positive things from Forman, and to get an invitation like that, I thought was pretty amazing. And again, I think provides a sense for the strategic place that or the strategic voice that a place like Forman can have in today's Pakistan.
It's very interesting. Leslie, you had a question?
Yeah, I was wondering. I know it's a couple questions. How hard is it for Pakistanis to get visas to travel to the United States for conferences and that type of thing at this point? I know it was difficult when we were there.
Yeah, this is a concern. And honestly, it's a concern. I've had a couple students, and I guess people feel like, I was in the State Department, I should be able to do something about this. It's harder than you imagine. And actually in the US system, one of the things you're told in your ambassadorial training school is, you don't interfere much in the visa process. I personally have been disappointed because I know of a couple of our students that were offered scholarships, not formal scholarships by universities, but I think in one case it was by a university. And it just completely floored me that they did not get a visa. And of course, for someone like that, it's a devastating, blow to what they perceive their future to be. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's better. In fairness, one could say that in the opposite direction too. Sometimes it ebbs and flows or whatever. I'm in a good place with a 2-year visa, and I appreciate that. But this one, I wrote a couple letters on behalf of our students, and was deeply disappointed at what happened. And I don't know what else to say about that. At the same time, I don't want to say that. Our professors are traveling. Usually, if one establishes a good track record for attending and has been multiple conferences in multiple countries, then you usually, as you should, get get access. Of course, the other thing that's happened, and maybe this is the best short-term response, because you asked how is it right now? Well, of course, COVID-19 has put, on the one hand, a kind of a shadow on what normally might have been opportunities for conferences and things like that. On the other hand, this international dimension I talk about, one of the hidden things about COVID-19 is we've had some amazing webinar ones that we've either participated in or in some cases have been launched directly by, like, our physics department recently, that got international participation from multiple continents. And kind of like we're meeting on Zoom, that's been one of the really intriguing aspects. Of course, it's what I guess I would like to see in the post-COVID-19 world is a chance to meet, because you have to have that human interaction. But I hope some of the kinds of webinars we've had also continue, because they really have added this international dimension that, as I've highlighted, I think is important for Forman and indeed important for Pakistan right now.
Yeah, and I there was some of that started shortly after we left. It wasn't in physics, it was another department, but the students were actually interacting during the course and getting to talk to one another about various things and their thoughts on global ideas, etc. I thought that was a wonderful way to begin making the connections across the borders.
Thank you very much, the two of you. Steve, it looks like you get the last question. or Stephen B. I'm not sure how collaborative the question is. I don't want to leave B, B out of this, but please go ahead.
Ambassador, you talked about Forman being a safe space for the exchange of ideas, and George raised this also. And my question is, how secure is the safety of that space with the strength of conservative Islam in Pakistan? And what other institutions are there in Pakistan that provide similar kinds of safe spaces that will encourage the continued progress of Pakistan intellectually?
Yeah, I think LUMS was mentioned before, and we have good good connections. Actually, again, Ambassador Akbar will know what I'm talking about, but Babar Ali, who was one of the leading lights behind the founding of LUMS, I recently had a very good lunch with him, and we also talked about ways to strengthen our relationship. And actually, shortly after that, our Vice Rector for Academic Affairs attended a conference there that was also very productive. And LUMS is another great institution, and again, I think we've got good connections back and forth, and sometimes they've talked to us too, and they feel like they can learn things too, or they appreciate that. So I think in terms of universities, I think LUMS would meet that category. I think in Karachi as well there'll be some. I noticed, by the way, that on the accreditation process, this is part of my trip here, I'll be meeting people from Habib University in Karachi. I'm actually on the board of the Habib University. And I have not been able to visit yet because of COVID-19, but I think that seems to be another institution that is reaching out and trying to, adopt a American liberal arts approach. In terms of the safe space, I guess one of the things I'm thinking about is the that seminar, that ISSB, that brought in some of the psychologists to sort of present about their perceptions of the younger generation. And, they did, and I don't know, I think this is beyond Pakistan, is that this generation has some huge stresses. And some of them are connected to the, the last many years in Pakistan and the stresses. And again, Ambassador Akbar Ahmed referred to, the war on terrorism and the casualty and the impact of that has been played out, especially in places like Afghanistan and Pakistan. So in some sense, it's a society, or maybe it's a world right now that's under some significant stress. I used the expression at lunch today, and I use it all the time. I'm using it increasingly common. I'm using it increasingly frequently, is that I'll take hope wherever I can find it. And I mean that in a positive way, because I think some people are too quick to despair. And, you will be on the Forman campus, and you will definitely, not just from, the nice campus, but the student stories. I'm trying to think. How much I want to share with you. I got an email just before I came from a parent who basically said she wanted to thank me. Her daughter had graduated, had attended Forman, and had been disappointed that her three sisters were studied overseas. She had to have some serious renal surgery before she came to Forman, and she just wanted to say that Forman had been wonderful for her daughter. Now, I don't know how many people are going to reach out like that, on graduation, send a note to the rector and say, thank you for what you provided, and thank you what you gave to my daughter. I wasn't sure if I'll tell this story, but we're talking about COVID-19, and it could be that, well, actually, I'm thinking maybe the Johnsons met them as well. But Dr. Kamal was the head of our English department, a Fulbright scholar. He had been blind from meningitis as an adolescent. He credited his Fulbright going to the States to being transformative in terms of living independently. He had a wonderful family, and everything. I only met him briefly, to be honest, because I had arrived, and so we met on a couple of occasions. But I guess in the spring, I got when COVID-19 was going through, basically he got COVID, and he sent me a note, and he said, "Jonathan, please pray for me." This is one of our many Muslim faculty, one of the many faculty who live out that by love for one another. He had influenced a generation of English professors. Actually, you might be surprised to know that one of his specialties was African-American female poetry. And of course, on Black History Month, the council would ask him to come and speak. And I think actually he had a final participation, and I think it's in February, and then he passed away in April. But to me, Dr. Kamal's story says so much about Forman, about the professors that we attached, about the impact that he had. And quite honestly, I don't know how many campuses in the US that this would happen and you'd reach out and do an email and say, Jonathan, please pray for me. I think that that's indicative of the people I refer to as harmony or whatever. I just think it's indicative of what Forman means, the lives that it can change. And again, the way it upturns a lot of stereotypes about Pakistan, about what it means to be a Christian university, about what it means in terms of even diversity. There's a lot of things that that make Forman a special place, and we'll have more time to talk about it later, but I think that gives you a sense. And I guess I gravitate at the end toward the personal stories, because I think ultimately it is about the people that make our community. And I could relate other stories as well, but they're just remarkable stories. And so maybe that's a good place to end. I'll take hope where I can find it. And I have had many reasons for hope this last year that I've been on the Forman campus.
That is a lovely note to end on.
Thank you, thank you, Dr. Jonathan.
Thank you for that. Yeah, lovely closing. We appreciate that you had a successful first year. We wish you many more. We appreciate the fact that you bring your diplomatic skills together with clearly a strong faith, and we appreciate both. So on that note, we thank everyone who participated and everyone who will be listening to this recording on the website for the support for the college and for women in particular there, the future of the region. So with that, we allow you to go to your next obligation. We know you have a busy first week of October here. I'm happy that we've ended in time for you to not rush too much. 6 o'clock was our goal, so we're good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Everybody
Goodbye. Safe travels, Dr. Jonathan.
Yes.
Thank you.
Safe travels.
We wish you well.
Thanks.